Welcome to Best Practices for Assessing Trauma's Impact on the Education of Children in Foster Care. My name is Michael Waller. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. Georgia Appleseed is a nonprofit law center committed to law and policy reform for the advancement of child welfare in Georgia. Now, over the next 45 minutes, you're going to hear from experts at the Department of Education and DFACS here in Georgia who are going to talk about the requirements of a new law, commonly referred to as HB 855. That law passed in the 2020 legislative session here in Georgia, and it has one major requirement, that schools assess the impact of trauma on a child's education success and behavior in the classroom. Now, I want you to focus on the word assess, because over the next 45 minutes, you're going to hear as we explain what that word means. And that's really critical, because we don't want schools to think that assessment or assess means some type of new screening or intrusive instrument that requires a child to recount or explores the trauma that a child may have suffered. Instead, what you're attempting to do is assess the impact that trauma might have on that child's success in the classroom and how to best support that success. One other point I want to explore with you for just a moment. That is, this new law doesn't stand in isolation. It should be part of the services that you already extend to the students in your care and in your schools. And for example, the law is closely related to and should be used in conjunction with the existing case management rule, which is 160.48.17. And that rule already requires school districts to meet with new children in foster care or other agency-based children and determine what kinds of transition services they might need. The school is already required to appoint a case manager in order to discuss with other team members and with the child what services that child might need in order to best support the child. Now, what you're going to hear today, the guidance that was developed by the Department of Education, was part of a long process that involved many of the state's top experts in foster care and in education and in trauma. So after the law was passed in 2020, Georgia Appleseed, DFACS, Department of Education, and another 15 or so institutional partners came together and met weekly and monthly over a year or more to form a series of best practices and potential and guidance for schools across the state. You'll hear today about the guidance that was issued by the Department of Education this fall, but you're going to find out more best practices and more information on the Georgia Appleseed website. So you can go to gaappleseed.org, that's gaappleseed.org. You'll go to our current initiatives page and the FAIR Project, which is our project focused on supporting children in foster care in Georgia. On that page, you'll find a link to a policy memo that gives you more detail about the law and also some of the best practices that you can employ. Now with that, I'm now going to introduce Cheryl Benefield, a representative from the Department of Education, who's going to talk with you more specifically about the requirements of the new guidance.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Benefield. I'm the Mental Health and Wellbeing Coordinator and Program Manager in the Office of Whole Child Supports at Georgia Department of Education. At Georgia Department of Education, we do focus on the whole child, and we subscribe to the tenets of the whole child. We look at everything that impacts the educational performance and attainment of our students in the state of Georgia, and we consider that when we talk about whole child at the department. The Georgia Department of Education solicited input and feedback for the development of the guidance for House Bill 855 from the Georgia Educational Climate Coalition, from DFACS, and from school social workers throughout the state. We used this feedback and this input to draft the guidance, which includes steps for implementation, best practices, and resources for support. The guidance for House Bill 855 states that upon the enrollment of a foster care student, that the district shall deliberately assess whether exposure to trauma has had or is likely to have an adverse impact on the foster care student's educational performance. And we really interpret that to mean not just upon the enrollment of a student in the district, but if you have a student who's in your district who is taken into care, also we're going to look at that child and look at what impact trauma has had on that student's educational attainment as well. The guidance we've drafted includes 4 parts. It's the student case management collaboration, screening for educational impact related to trauma, and the LEA plan of support based on educational impact screening. We also include resources and supports for the impact of trauma on students. The student case management collaboration section of our guidance, we really look at what already exists in your district. As Michael stated, you have the case management rules, so there may be case management and should be case management happening in your district. So we look at that. We look at who we have as LEA staff that might be available. Who is your foster care point of contact and your school point of contact if you have one? Who's your social worker at the district level or at the school level? And who is that child's case manager if there is one assigned? The points of contact for your collaborating agencies are going to be DFACS and your foster care case manager there, as well as your DFACS regional education support monitor. These people really need to be included, and that needs to be really on your radar when you're looking at who you put on this case management collaboration team. The screening for educational impact related to trauma, I'm really glad Michael touched on the assessment piece. This is not a formalized assessment. It's not written that way, and it was not intended that way. It's not how we have it in our guidance. We're really looking at gathering the data around this student. So when we talk about the screener, we're looking at how we gather the data and what that data looks like. And the screener kind of gives you a way to really do it in an organized fashion and to do it in a way that you're going to get the most benefit out of the information you're putting together. So in your SLDS, your State Longitudinal Data System, in your SLDS operational tab, there's a foster report. You can go there to find the students who've been identified as being in foster care or who are in care. And if you know that you have a student who's been taken into care and they're not listed in that tab, you need to reach out to your local DFACS office or to your regional educational support person to find out how you go about getting that student flagged in SLDS. Because having that flag in SLDS is really going to help you with keeping track of all of the different pieces of information that you're going to be gathering. Consent for screening. You can do passive consent. You can do active consent. It's not really a screener of the student, so you don't technically have to have consent unless you do choose to do some sort of educational screening of that student. But just for general purposes of putting this information together, you really don't need a consent unless you do, again, a specific screener. And the educational impact screener, we get a lot of questions about which screener and who completes it. So let's take a look at what that really means. We've got a couple of educational impact screener examples here. One is super simple, and this is exactly what I mentioned previously. You're just putting together some information. And this is where you look at things that you would typically look at for a student, any student who may be struggling, but any student that you know is going through something and you think there's going to be an impact. Absolutely true for our students in foster care. So you are gathering just this basic information. You're looking at that child's learning style and needs. You're describing their mental and emotional needs and their well-being, the characteristics the child needs in a teacher, and any additional information. So, critical to know, as a new student, you're not going to have this information. This is where you're going to have to reach out to the previous school, right? So this screener is not meant for you to be the only person. This screener, for lack of a better term, is meant to be shared with other people, just as you would any type of screening that you were doing for a student, where you're gathering input from other people who would have knowledge about that child's behavior, about that child's needs. It's the same thing. So you won't know necessarily what this child's learning style is or what their needs are, but a previous teacher might, a previous counselor, social worker, the DFACS case manager might know who would have that knowledge. So this is where you start working with your partners and really gathering the information. Again, this is not a screener of that child that assesses educational, what's their reading level, what's their math level, where are they on DIBELS. It's not that kind of screener. It's really the gathering of information. Now, we're looking at example 2, and this came from Cobb County. You'll hear a lot more about this screener from our next presenters. But this one goes into more detail. This one really walks you through gathering some very specific and very discrete pieces of information. So, again, you can have a more general look at the impact or what this child's needs might be, or you can really take a deep dive and go into a lot of very specific details about this child's educational achievement, what their history is, and what you need. The plan of support is then written after you gather information. you wouldn't write a plan for any other child without information, so you certainly wouldn't do it in this case either. It's the same thing. So you're going to take those screening results. Now, we put in our guidance, you could do this through an SST process, MTSS, RTI, whatever your process is in your district. And the reason we did that is because you already have these teams in place. The intent of this is not to develop a separate team, a new team, or something on top of what you already do, but to use your existing mechanisms and your existing practices to serve the needs of our students who are going into foster care. So look at this stuff, create your team in the context of the teams you already have. Now, if you have a foster student, a student in care who already has an IEP, or they have an eligibility for special ed but don't yet have an IEP, then you should convene that IEP meeting to review the results of the educational impact screener and to discuss those recommendations, staying in that lane. Now, again, as Michael said, this is not a way to get any students into special ed. It's not a way to identify any students as needing special ed, because we all know that's a violation of IDEA. We would never do that. So we're not looking at it from that perspective. We're looking at it from the perspective of, if this child has an existing IEP, convene that IEP team and make that your team. If they don't, use the SST or MTSS or RTI process, simply because you already have that in place. Now, including multiple sources of data is going to be critically important. Again, you would do this if you were writing a plan for any student, so you're going to do the same thing here. You're going to use that educational impact screener, any available or current psychological or other evaluations. Of course, any of that would be redacted for HIPAA compliance, just as you would with any other student. Student academic records from your school, from previous schools, whatever they have, easily accessible in SLDS. If they're not a student from the state of Georgia, then you know the steps for working with other states to get that information. Student attendance and discipline records, same thing. Your Form 3300, right? That's your certificate of vision, hearing, dental, nutritional screening. You know how to work with all of these pieces of information because these are the practices that you've done before. You've done this for all your other students. You're just doing it now in the context of applying it for students going into foster care. Definitely looking at all of the paperwork, all of the forms, gathering all of this information, and getting ready to write your plan. Now, if that team, the SST, MTSS, RTI, or if you create a separate standalone team, if that team suspects the student of having a disability, just as you would with any other student, then you have to refer them for an evaluation. And that is all part of what you already do. You already have this stuff in place. But if you don't suspect the student of having a disability, then you continue to use your existing processes to monitor that student, because the effects of trauma don't always show up right away. You know, it may not be that a student goes into care on Tuesday and on Wednesday they've got an immediate educational impact, or there may not have been a previous educational impact, so you don't see it for a little while. Keep an eye on your students. Continue to monitor so that you know what's happening and you're able to evaluate that trauma impact as it shows up, because it probably will. So keep an eye on that. You should ensure that all staff that's involved in the team receive an appropriate summary of results for foster care students. Now, just as you would with any other student, an appropriate summary of results. That doesn't mean that you print out everything that there is about this child and hand it to everybody who might be involved. I was a former special ed teacher, and we would often have the entire IEP, but we would print off a short version specifically for what those teachers needed to have. What is the educational impact? What are the goals? What do you need to know? So we would print that version that just had the details of what they needed, but then that big IEP that might be this thick is kept where it needs to be, and it's available for anybody who needs to access it. But keeping that information short, simple, and giving the educators who are working directly with those students the information they need is going to be key. Now, one really good thing that you can do here is to develop your TIES plan through this process. So DFACS has the TIES plan, and our DFACS representative will speak to that shortly. But if you use this opportunity to work with DFACS to create the TIES plan It's going to create a really strong support system for that student. It's going to make things a lot easier for everybody involved. There won't be multiple plans and multiple agencies. So use this as an opportunity. It's not a requirement. You certainly don't have to, but it is such a great opportunity to partner with your partners at DFACS to support the needs of these students in foster care. Here's a little bit more about the DFACS Trauma-Informed Education Support TIES plan. It's there, and again, I'll let DFACS speak to that, but you'll see as you look at it, if you really look at what the TIES plan includes, and it is included in an appendix in our guidance, it really does do a lot of this work. It really does include a lot of the information you're going to be gathering. It's, again, a great opportunity, and as we say in the guidance, consider using this as the opportunity to write that TIES plan as part of this process with your DFACS partners, not the school system writing the TIES plan alone. This is all it needs to be collaborative. It needs to all be cohesive and inclusive of multiple partners and everybody that's involved. Resources and supports are included in our guidance, and you can access that and access our guidance at the Whole Child website. So at gadoe.org/Whole Child, one word, that's where you'll find a page that's dedicated to House Bill 855. It includes our guidance. This webinar will be housed there, and you'll also find resources and supports that you can access related to trauma, trainings, a lot of things that we have available that will help you as you support your students in care. Now let's talk about, as we're closing, what House Bill 855 does. It underscores the potential impact of trauma on the educational performance of youth. We hear a lot about trauma, we do a lot of training around trauma, and we all know that trauma has an impact on people. So this gives you the opportunity, and it underscores the potential for the impact of that trauma on those students who are in care. And honestly, a student going into foster care is going to be traumatic. A student being removed from their family is going to be traumatic. So keeping an eye on these students and looking for what that educational impact might be. It ensures that schools and DFACS coordinate to identify and provide appropriate supports to students in foster care. This is one of the reasons we really encourage you to use this as an opportunity to work with your DFACS partners to develop that TIES plan. Now, what House Bill 855 does not do, it does not require that you or anyone in the school district conduct a trauma assessment. Trauma assessments are not something that should be done lightly. It's not something that should be done repeatedly. And we know that DFACS does their own trauma assessments. So you can work with your partners at DFACS around whatever trauma assessment they may be doing, but this does not require, and there's no expectation in the guidance that you will conduct a formal trauma assessment of these students. Please don't re-traumatize a student unnecessarily. Work with your DFACS partners. It does not require that all youth going into foster care be evaluated or placed in special education, and we really want to hit that hard. This is not a fast track to special education. It does not put a target on students in care. There is nothing in the guidance, there is nothing in any expectation that anyone would have of you that you are going to be moving students in foster care or really giving them extra attention for special education services. That would be a violation of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and it just wouldn't be right to target any group of students any more than you would any other group as needing or deserving of special ed services. So keep those two things in mind as what you don't do as part of House Bill 855 or what the law itself does not require or expect of you. My contact information is here. You can absolutely shoot me an email if there's anything you need. I'm part of the team at the department that does work on the House Bill 855 guidance, and we'll be providing oversight and coming out with some additional resources and training for you. Again, access any of the materials that I've mentioned today on the Whole Child websites, and we'll hand it over now to our representatives from DFACS and a school district.
My name is Josette Franklin. I serve as the Education Quality Specialist for DFACS, specifically for the EPAC team, which is the Educational Programming Assessment and Consultation Unit. I also worked on with the working group for House Bill 855 guidance to the Department of Education. And today we will be sharing with you some best practices, practical application for House Bill 855.
And I'm Anna Murphy. I am actually a school social work supervisor for Cobb County Schools, but serve as the foster care point of contact for Cobb County and have had the opportunity to also serve on the HB 855 work group for the past year. And so today what we would like to do is just provide you all with an opportunity to look at some best practices and stress that in no way is this what is being required, or it is simply just a suggestion of best practice, and we hope that you will find this as useful as possible. As you can tell, and so students new to foster care, we wanted to make sure that we looked at the LEA, which is your local education agency, so your districts, and also our district DFACS office. We identified an ongoing scheduled meeting that was what we are suggesting to review children who are brought into DFACS custody within the past week. Just as an example, in Cobb County, we have a regular set meeting that we sit down with our DFACS office and really discuss the students who have been brought into care, into foster care, and identify what is in their best interest at that time. During those meetings, the LEA representative will complete the initial student entering foster care, which is a hyperlink, and I'll click on it in a second, in order to capture as much information as possible.
And one of the items that we really want to stress is how to capitalize on the collaboration between the school system and your local DFACS. And so that is, in our minds, really the strength of this particular legislation, where we can work together to make sure that students are supported in the best way possible using available information that we already have, and as Cheryl mentioned earlier, using systems that we already have in place to best support students. And so as we're going into this suggested practice, keep that in mind, that we are really trying to help put this together with systems that you already have in place. It is, again, not some separate and isolated system, but it is all ready to be embedded in what you already do.
And so as you can see in the hyperlink, and please duplicate this if you find it useful. This is just really starting to gather that information, gathering the student's name, the student's GTID number, which is going to be very useful, especially when it is linked up with SLDS and identifying those students in care. The date of the student entering foster care, the name of the DFACS case manager, and then also looking, does this student have a diagnosis? Is there an outcome of the review? Is this student to remain at their school of origin, withdraw and go to a new school within the school district, and or withdraw and enroll at a new school? It does say CCSD, which is Cobb County, but as you duplicate it, you'll be able to tweak this however you would like. You can ask questions and delete questions. And then also listing new name of school, new enrolling adult. Look at, is it the student going to be virtual or face-to-face? And then also looking to make sure that your DFACS case manager has the information as far as changing that enrollment piece for the student. So this information is shared with the appropriate LEA representative within the school district. It could be your local school social worker, could be your school counselor, definitely your enrolling clerk, and possibly even the SSA if their information needs to be shared with them. And this is really to ensure that the change of the enrolling adult is adequately completed, and that really stresses the safety of the child.
As we mentioned before, there are some existing supports already in place, and on the DFACS end, there is the DFACS policy for a best interest determination. And that meeting is held when a student enters foster care to really determine what the best placement is, school placement is, for a child entering foster care. And so when a school system uses that collaboration with DFACS to get that information that the case manager would have already assembled, that is just an excellent way to really support House Bill 855 and to make sure that the student is receiving the best possible services and supports. So that best interest determination, it can be a separate meeting, or it can already be embedded into that initial meeting that school systems have. It really is how your school system sets it up and how you all build that collaboration with DFACS.
We did also want to mention for those students who are out of the county that DFACS case manager will contact the LEA foster care point of contact. I would like to note that the foster care point of contact list is available on the Georgia DOE website. So if you have not accessed it yet, it is there and it is up to date. And also making sure that the enrollment procedures for that specific school district is followed. So next we'll talk a little bit about, again, best practice for our trauma-informed educational support plan, which is our TIES, and this is what is completed by the school system with or without the trauma-informed recommendation sheets. So again, this is completed with or without the trauma-informed recommendation sheet that is completed by DFACS. It is recommended that it be completed, the trauma-informed support plan be completed within 30 days of the enrollment of that student or when the enrolling adult changes in the system. So again, this is just a sample best practice. You are able to duplicate it and add questions, delete questions, however you find it most useful for your district. Looking at the student's name again, the GTID number, the current school name, current grade that the student attends, date of the best interest determination meeting, if that has been held. Has the enrolling adult been changed? Again, that is a big piece that we're always looking at to just ensure the safety of the child. Is transportation needed? And that question really comes about because of the need, if the student is to stay in their school of origin, making sure that transportation is provided and that there's no issue with that student remaining at their school of origin. Who are the members of the meeting? What are the student's strengths and current supports within and outside of the school? Concerns of trauma impacted the student's learning and behaviors. At this time, I would definitely like to stress the importance of looking at the student's behavior and making sure that that is always considered, especially when we are looking at any behavior issues within the classroom. So the TIES plan is facilitated by the local school social worker because, as mentioned right at the opening, this is part of the case management consultation board policy. And in there, the school social worker is the one that is responsible for having that discussion and making sure that the supports are being offered to that student. Understanding, again, that many districts do not have school social workers. So, again, this is all best practice. The members of the meeting of who we would suggest and recommend is absolutely the caregiver, the student, depending on their age, the local school social worker, your local school psychologist, local school counselor, definitely your DFACS case manager, and then your SSA and EPAC representative if deemed appropriate, especially for those students who are in special education.
We're recommending a set time and date for those meetings. Recommended that all parties who were in that initial meeting are aware of the set time and date, and so that we are keeping constant monitoring of the students as they are being supported.
It is also important to note that when a student transfers from one district to the other, that the DFACS case manager will share the TIES plan into the new district until we are able to upload those plans in SLDS. And that, again, is why it's so important to make sure that we utilize the GTID numbers, because there's only one GTID number throughout the state of Georgia for each student. We appreciate the time that you took today for participating in this talk, and I am happy to share my contact information if I can be of any assistance.
Thank you, Cheryl, Anna, and Josette. Just to recap something really important. You are not alone. School districts across the state and schools across the state are implementing this new law and this new requirement. So please reach out to us for additional information. You can see on the slide links to websites at the Department of Education and Georgia Appleseed where you'll find more information, templates, and exemplars that you can use, and also contact information. Let us know if you need any help or you need additional guidance. Let me end by thanking all of you for everything that you do every day to make and build a brighter future for all of Georgia's children.